In this video, we're going to be going into exactly how you can extract some of the code from our existing application into common components. We're also going to be removing the with authenticator so that we can create and manage our own authentication and login. So we're going to jump straight into the code and see how we can get that all set up. So now that we're in the code, we can have a look at what we've done so far and talk about what we're going to be doing. So we have some storage for the songs that are playing, and then we have a use effect which will get all of the songs from the database when this app starts up. We have some functions for toggling a song on or off. We can also fetch songs from our database. We can add a like to a specific song using our GraphQL operators as well. And then we have our app. This app has a header with my app and the Amplify sign out button. And then it has this component here called SongList, where we create a row for each song. At the end of it, we're using the with authenticator, which comes from Amplify, to deploy our app with a Amplify login. As well as this, we have the ability to add songs. So you can upload a song from your machine, give it a title, description, and an owner, and then deploy that up to our S3 storage and add it to our GraphQL database. Here's the code for the components, and this part is relatively simple. So what is it that we're going to be doing in this video? Well, we're going to be separating out as much of this into its own components as possible to simplify this app component. We're then going to be removing the default Amplify with authenticator that we showed here so that we can control the authentication ourselves, so you don't have to be logged in to see the app. After that, we're going to add some routing and our own custom login component, which is going to be really interesting and allows a lot more flexibility than using the default with authenticator. So the first thing we want to do is actually extract this song list into its own component. So I'm going to create a new folder in my source and call it components. And in here, create a new folder, call it song list. And in there's going to be an index.jsx. So with a song component, we can create const of song list, and this is going to be a functional component, just like that. And this is going to resemble very closely our main app.jsx component. We need to import a couple of things. So we need to import React from React, and that is it just for now. What we can do next is go back into our app.jsx and select this whole div from SongList and everything within there. So you can actually do that by minimizing this section and copying it like that. And now it's gone from here. And inside our component, what we can do is we can go and say that this song list is going to return, use normal braces and paste everything in there. If we save this we now have that whole song list, and we've not had to change any of the code in here. Some things that we do notice though is some of the variables are now missing, such as which song is playing, the list of songs, and functions such as the ability to toggle which song is playing. Our smart way of doing this is going to the top of your file and doing // @tscheck, and this is going to use TypeScript to check all of the values and all the variables in your code to make sure that they are properly allocated. So the first ones we want to sort out are the ones such as the components like paper and icon, where if we hover over it, go to quick fix, we can import paper from material UI, which is exactly the same as we did inside our app.jsx, just here. We can go through and do the rest of them. So icon button, if we go and import that, and React player, import that from the component. AddSong we'll get to in a little bit, and for now the only ones left are the pause and play icons, and we're going to copy those from our app.jsx. So we can just copy all of the icons and paste them into here. And now the only red lines we've got are the variables and the functions. So what we're going to do is do exactly the same thing as we did just then, is we're going to go into our app.jsx and have a look for the variables that are missing. So these are all the variables that we want to be using, and we can actually copy everything all the way down to add like and remove it from app. That's because all of the functionality we've just been looking at was within this song list. If we paste all of that in here, we've now added in all of the variables, so we just need to do a couple of extra things. We need to import the use state and add that as a declaration onto our React, as the same with use effect. Now that we've done that, we can go through and have a look at what else needs fixing. So here we have storage.get. So what we can do is go back into app.jsx, find our storage, which is here, and we can copy the whole line, go to the top, paste it in, and then remove the sections that we don't need. At the moment, that is just the core Amplify. So if we go down, we now have file access URL, and that's complaining because there is a possibility that storage.get returns an object, but we know that this is going to be a string, so that is okay. Next, we also need to find list songs. What we need to do is go across into our app.jsx and cut that from here and import that at the top of our file. Next thing is update song, and that will be a very similar process where we're going to copy this whole row, and this time we're copying it because create song is needed in here at the moment, and import that at the top. So with these two, because we're now in components songlist.index.js, our relative paths are slightly different. So instead of it being in the same folder and then under GraphQL, we need to go from the song list down to components, down to source, and then back to GraphQL. So that is .. GraphQL queries and .. // and GraphQL mutations. So now we're clearing up quite a lot of these. Here where it's saying that the data field may not exist, that's because we don't know the type of song data. Because we're using JavaScript, we're not explicitly saying what the type of this song data is, but we know that it works, so for now we're just going to leave it. So the last thing is at the bottom of this file, the AddSong, and that was a component we added in our app.jsx, and we're actually going to move that into its own component. So in app.jsx, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll find the AddSong component. What we can do is copy the whole of that component. Inside components, create not a new file, but a new folder. Call it AddSong. Inside here, create a new file, index.jsx, and paste that in there just like that. As we know before, there are going to be some missing things, so if we go to the top of our file, put comment at tscheck, that will help highlight some things we need to import. We knew that the state and React are some things we need to import, so we can actually just copy those from the SongList this time. So import React and use state. If we copy that across, that will save some of our time. Next, we need storage in this one as well. So if we find storage and copy that across. Lastly, we need UUID. So this one we didn't use in our song list, so will be still in our app.jsx. And there we find it. So if we cut that, paste that into there, that'll fix that part. Again, these are type errors because we don't know what song data is going to be. And finally is create song, which we can copy from our song list as it's imported here. Paste that in as well. And that is all of the logic. Now it's just the text field, which is from our material UI, our icon button, and then the publish icon. This publish icon is inside our app.jsx, so cut that, paste that at the top, and now the only errors are type errors because we don't know the type of song data. What we can now do is delete the tscheck just to get rid of those red markers. And now we have the song list and AddSong. Last thing we need to do is copy the song list, and at the very bottom of the file we need to export default song list and also get our AddSong and import AddSong from // AddSong. Inside our AddSong, we actually need to export it so that it can be imported into our song list. So export default AddSong. Now we can go into our app.jsx, delete out all of the parts that are now not highlighted, as we don't need to use them and don't need to import them into this file as they're imported into one of our components. The last thing we need to do in here is actually add a component, which is our song list, into here. So SongList, just like that. So if we now save this file, So if we now save this file, it will rebuild it using our components, and our app has just become a lot cleaner to work with. So if we now go across into our app, it has used our with authenticator as it did before. If we decide to log in, we can sign in as we did before, and the components are there as they were before. This now sets us up really nicely for the next stage, where we can start adding some changes to this to make it a little bit more flexible in how we want to work. So the first real change we're going to do is by changing the Amplify sign out button to our own custom button. So what we're going to do is just use a button, which is going to come from Material UI. Going to have a variant, and that is going to be contained, and there's going to be a color, and that is going to be primary, and the last thing that we're going to have in here is an on click, and that is going to be a function called sign out. Inside this button, we're just going to have a simple text of sign out. And we now need to create this sign out function. So const sign out equals an arrow function. And this is going to be an async function. So we can put async there. In this function, we're probably going to use a try catch because that is an easy way of handling errors. So try, and then we're going to await auth.sign out. So auth, which comes from Amplify, has a lot of different features. So we actually need to import auth from Amplify, like this, and it has methods for signing out, signing in, for registering, signing up, two-factor authentication, all those kind of things you can do instead of using the components by calling methods. This means that we can control the UI and have Amplify on the background using Cognito to control the authentication. So now that is done, we can then add a catch in case there is an error. And we're going to do something simple and just console.log error signing out and the error message. Now it's telling us that the button is missing. So what we need to do is import our button. So the easiest way to do that, as I showed before, is add a comment at the top of @tscheck, which will now use TypeScript to debug this. And we can quick fix add the button from Material UI. If we resave this and go across into our app, the only difference now is the sign out button looks like a different kind of button, not the default Amplify one. If we click on sign out and refresh the page, we can see that we have actually signed out and would have to log in again if we want to access our app. The next thing we want to do is to add some routing, or routing if you prefer. So we're doing this because later in the video we're going to have different routes for signing in as well as the main app. So in a new terminal, what we need to do is install some new packages, and that is going to be npm i -s because we want to save this one, and it's going to be React auth-router-dom. And whilst that is importing, we'll actually start using it. So the way that you use it is you create a router component around the whole of your app. And then inside there, you can do a switch statement and say, if you're on a certain route, show this component. So to do that, first start by adding a router and wrapping the whole of the existing app. Now that we have that, the thing that we want to stay and always be there is the header, but things after the header may change depending on what URL you're on. So in here, I'm going to put a switch, and inside a switch you can then put a route, and inside a route you can put components. So I'm going to put the SongList inside this route and say that if the exact path equals /, which means it's the root of the component, then show the SongList. And so if you're on any other path, you won't see this SongList component. So now what we need to do is import the root and router components as well as this switch. So the switch has already imported from React router DOM. So we need to import root, and then the type of router we're using is the browser router, and we're just going to be referencing that as router. So if we save this, we now have no red issues. So if we go over to our app and we sign in, we'll now have our components. But if we change the URL to something like another URL, we now don't see our song list. This is obviously not very useful because we can't see our song list, but we can add other URLs with other paths. So the next thing we're actually going to do is create our own sign-in component and show that whenever someone goes to sign in. And that will allow us to control the login or the sign in and the sign out process all ourselves so that we can get rid of that authenticator. So to do that, we can go into our app again and actually remove this with authenticator, as we don't want to use that anymore. What we do need to do is actually manage a state ourselves of whether we are logged in or not. So if we go right the way to the top of our app, what we need to do is we need to set a state of logged in. So const logged in and set log in equals use state, and we're going to set it to true by default. Again, we need to import this, so if we quick fix and add it to our React import, once that has set up, we now have a state in our app telling us whether we are logged in or not. Now, I've set this to true at the start, but what happens if you start the app and you weren't already logged in? So I'm actually going to set this to false. What we need to do is we need a way of finding out from AWS Amplify whether the user is logged in or not. And the way that we do that is by using that auth component again. So I'm going to create a function which makes it easy to find out. I'm going to call that assess logged in state. And this function is going to call auth.currentAuthenticated_user. This is going to return a promise, and if there is someone actually signed in, they're going to hit a then block. And in here, we can have a function saying that if they are signed in, it's going to hit the then block, and we're going to set logged in to be true. But if there's no one logged in currently, it's going to fail, so we can use a catch. And in here, it's only going to get run if we are not logged in, so set logged in to false. We can now save that, and we have a way of assessing whether anyone is logged in. With this, we can now use a use effect. And inside here, we're simply going to call this assess logged in state, and we're going to call it just once when the app first initializes. So we're going to use an empty bracket, which means trigger this once and once only. So that just means that we now have a logged in state, which will be changed to match whether there is actually anyone logged in. The next thing we can do is go down to our sign out, and once we have signed out, we can change our set logged in status to false, just because we know that if this sign out has succeeded, they're no longer logged in. Now that we have that logged in state, we can do a couple of small changes up in our header. If you are signed in, then we should definitely be showing the sign out button. So I'm going to use optional rendering and say that if someone is logged in, show this button. But if they are not logged in, we want to show a sign in button. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new button. I'm going to copy some of these parameters, just like that. And I'm going to call that sign in. And then just use a curly bracket at the end to close off this statement. Save that. And now, anytime we're logged in, we should see sign out. Anytime we're not logged in, we should see sign in. So if we head across to our code, we should see that it says sign out and now sign in. Unfortunately, at the moment, when we click sign in, nothing really happens. And that's because we don't have an on click and we don't have anything else with this component. So what we're actually going to do is, instead of adding an on click, we're going to wrap this in a link which will redirect the user to a sign in page. So to do that, I'm going to create a new component called link and import link from React Router DOM. I'm then going to paste that at the end using a backslash and save that. And now we have a link wrapping the button. So the only thing we need to do is add a to, which is the URL that we want to redirect the user to, which is going to be sign in. If we save this, head over to our code, to our app, just refresh the page, and if we hit sign in, we've now been redirected to the sign in page. That's great. So now what we need to do is actually have something at that sign in route. So if we go down to our switch statement, we can add a new route, and in that route we're going to say that if the path equals /sign in, then we're going to add a new component called sign in. Now, at the moment, this sign in component doesn't exist, so let's make it. Let's go into our components, add a new folder, call it sign in, and a new index.jsx. Oh, that's not worked. New file, index.jsx. In here, we need to import React from React. And now we can create our signing component. So const sign in, functional component. And what we're going to do in here is going to be relatively simple. It's just going to have some text fields for the username and password, and then a button. So we're going to return a div. That div is going to have a class name of sign in. Inside here, we're also going to have a text field, and this text field is going to have a couple of values, and is going to be, if we add the comment at tscheck, in a second that will tell us that we need to import this from Material UI. We can add an ID of username, label username, and let's put capital U on that. We can set a value, and our value is going to be username, and we'll set that in a sec, as well as the on change. This is going to be a function. It's going to take an event, and it's going to do set username, and the username is going to be e.target.value. Now here we're using a username and a set username that don't exist yet, so const username set username equals use state. I'm going to start that off with an empty string. It's complaining about use state, so let's import that as well. And we're now going to repeat this process again for password. So I'm going to copy all of this, paste it, and I'm just going to change these to password, change the case on some of them, and do the same up here. So change this to password and password. So we now have both a password and a username field. Last thing we need is a sign in button. So let's again create a button. I'm going to call this one ID equals sign in button, color equals primary, and we're going to have an on click, and we're going to create a function called sign in. With all of that, we're going to have our button with just a simple text of sign in. Again, we need to import this from Material UI and then create our sign in function. So const sign in equals an empty function, and inside this function what we're going to do is we're going to run try and then const user equals await auth, using that auth object again that comes from Amplify, dot sign in. Now if we can, we're going to import auth from Amplify, and then we can see that auth.signin takes a username and a password. So we can pass the username and password into this function. And now that we have signed in, we need to actually redirect the user from the sign in URL back to the home page. So the way that you can do that is another little trick with React Router DOM is we can do something called use history. So const history equals use history, and that we can import from React Router DOM. And this history is really neat in the fact that it allows us to do stuff like history.push and push a new path into the history which redirects the user to a different page. As well as that, we also want to tell the app that we have signed in so that it can change its local state for whether we've signed in. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a variable that we've passed in here called on sign in. Let's spell it correctly. So on sign in, and we're just going to call it here, which means we need to add that as a new parameter that we pass in from app.jsx. Because this is a try, let's add a catch, and that catch is going to catch an error, and if there is, going to console.log there was an error logging in and error. So now that we have all of that, one thing we need to do is make sure that this says async to match the await, and then at the bottom of our file we need to take our sign in and export default sign in. If we now go to our app.jsx, we can find this, use the quick fix and import sign in. Let's see if it can find it. It can't seem to find it at the moment. So if we manually go to the top and import sign in from /components/sign in, and now go back down to our sign in, and now it's complaining that we need it to pass in our on sign in parameter, and we're going to use a function here, and we're going to call it exactly the same thing, on sign in. So create a new function at the top of our app called const on sign in, and whenever this gets called, all we want to do is set logged in to be true. So now we can head over into our app, where we can see that we have the sign in button because we're currently not signed in, and we can see where we would normally see our list of songs. If we hit the sign in button, we can get to our sign in component, which at the moment looks pretty ugly, but could be styled using just normal CSS to look however you want it. If you want your logo with username then password, that's fine. If you want to make it really extravagant, you can make it look exactly how you want it to look. So in here, if we enter our username and our password and hit sign in, it redirects us back to our homepage using for that history, and then we can now see our list of songs. We can also see that we have got a sign out button instead of a sign in button. If we now refresh the page, we are going to check the state using auth, realize we are logged in, and show it as normal. But if we hit the sign out button and refresh the page, again we can no longer see the list of songs because we aren't currently signed in. One thing you may have noticed when we did sign in is that the password box was just a plain text. So if we go into our code again, find our sign in, change our text field and have a type equals password and save that. When we go over here and we type things, now we just get bullet points instead of seeing the characters, which is very nice for security. Now that we have all of this set up, we are in a really good place to be able to customize our sign-in process. If you wanted, you could also add a sign up button and do exactly the same process as we've done. Create a new route for in our app.jsx, call it sign up, create a new component where a user can enter their name, email, their password, and any other information you want them to provide. And then on the auth properties, I'll do it here. So if I do auth dot, there is in here the ability to sign up. And this sign up takes a set of parameters, which are the sign up parameters, which can be found in the Amplify docs. So if you want to set that up yourself, it will be very similar to this sign in component. So thank you for watching this version of this Amplify video. If you've enjoyed learning more about exactly what you need to do step by step, then make sure to let me know in the comments below. And if you've learned something new, make sure to give this video a like. And if you haven't done already, subscribe down below and turn on the bell notification so that you get notified next time I upload a video to YouTube. Thank you, and I'll see you in that next video.